The train whistle pierced the air at Promise Creek Station one summer morning in 1875. Sarah Winters stepped onto the platform, holding only a small carpet bag and some wrinkled letters. She had come as a mail-order bride, hoping for a new life. But when her intended groom's family saw her worn dress and empty pockets, they turned her away with cruel words. What Sarah didn't know was that Jackson Cooper, the richest rancher around, was watching everything. He saw something in her that reminded him of his own past, a determination to survive no matter what. Could this moment of rejection become the turning point that would change Sarah's life forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Promise Creek's dusty main street as Sarah Winters clutched her carpet bag closer, her knuckles white against the worn leather. Inside, wrapped carefully in her mother's shawl, lay the sum total of her worldly possessions. A family Bible with births and deaths recorded in fading ink, her mother's silver thimble, and 3 dresses she'd carefully mended for her new life. That new life had lasted precisely 8 minutes. "No daughter of mine will marry a pauper," Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwood had declared, her voice carrying across the platform as she inspected Sarah like a horse at auction. Her son Thomas, Sarah's intended, had merely stood there, eyes downcast, as his mother dismissed the woman he'd exchanged letters with for 6 months. Sarah's feet carried her numbly down the street, past the general store where ladies in fine dresses paused their shopping to whisper behind gloved hands, past the bank where Thomas's father served as president, its brick facade as unwelcoming as the family's stern faces had been. She had exactly $3.42 in her reticule, enough for perhaps 2 nights' lodging, if she could find somewhere willing to take her in. The sound of horse hooves behind her made her step quickly to the side of the wooden walkway, not wanting to add trail dust to her already travel-worn appearance. But the rider slowed beside her, and a kind voice called out, "Miss, you look like you might be seeking lodging." The speaker was an older woman with silver-streaked hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She sat comfortably astride a gentle-looking bay mare. "I'm Margaret Henderson. I run the boarding house just past the church." Sarah swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. I'm not sure I can afford—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Henderson interrupted, her expression softening. "Let's get you settled first, and we can discuss terms later. No one should be wandering these streets in this heat." Later, in a small but clean room on the boarding house's 2nd floor, Sarah finally allowed her tears to fall. She sat on the narrow bed, her carpet bag open beside her, and pulled out the stack of letters that had led her here. Thomas's handwriting flowed across the pages, promises of a comfortable home, assurances that his family would welcome her, dreams of a shared future, managing his father's investments while raising a family. All lies, it seemed. Or perhaps not lies, but dreams as insubstantial as the paper they were written on, crumbling in the face of his family's expectations and his own weakness. "I brought you some tea." Mrs. Henderson's voice came from the doorway. She entered carrying a tray with a steaming pot and 2 cups. "And I thought you might like to tell me your story. Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter." Sarah straightened her shoulders, quickly wiping her eyes. "I wouldn't want to trouble you." "Trouble me?" Mrs. Henderson settled into the room's single chair with a soft laugh. "My dear, you forget I run a boarding house. Other people's stories are my bread and butter. Quite literally, as they're what keep my rooms filled, and yours, I suspect, is more interesting than most." The older woman's manner was so matter-of-fact, so free of either pity or judgment, that Sarah found herself talking. She told of her parents' death from influenza 2 winters past, of trying to maintain their small millinery shop alone, of watching their modest savings dwindle as larger stores drew away their customers, of seeing Thomas's advertisement in the newspaper, "Respectable businessman seeks educated wife," and their subsequent correspondence, "Ah, the Blackwoods." Mrs. Henderson's tone held understanding. "They fancy themselves Promise Creek's first family, though they've only been here 15 years. Now, if you want to know about real old money and genuine class in these parts, you'd do better to look to—" She stopped herself. "But that's neither here nor there. What matters is tonight you have a roof over your head, and tomorrow is a new day. Promise Creek may not have given you the welcome you expected, but that doesn't mean it won't surprise you yet. Later that night, lying in the narrow bed, Sarah held her mother's silver thimble, running her finger along its worn edge. In the morning, she would need to find work. Perhaps one of the shops would need help, or one of the ranches might need a cook. She had 2 days, 3 at most, before her meager funds ran out. But for tonight, she allowed herself to grieve for the future she'd thought was waiting here, while trying to gather courage for whatever tomorrow might bring. Dawn painted Promise Creek in shades of pink and gold as Sarah made her way down the boarding house stairs. She'd put on her best dress, the dark blue one with only one carefully mended tear at the hem, determined to start her job search early. But Mrs. Henderson was already waiting at the bottom of the stairs, a curious expression on her face. "There's someone here to see you," the older woman said, gesturing toward the parlor. "Mr. Jackson Cooper." Sarah's heart skipped. Everyone in Promise Creek knew the Cooper name. She'd seen it on the largest general store in town, on the livery stable, and heard it mentioned in whispered conversations at the train station. The Coopers owned the biggest ranch in 3 counties, and half the water rights in the territory. Jackson Cooper stood as she entered the parlor, and Sarah's first impression was of quiet strength. He wasn't as elaborately dressed as Thomas Blackwood had been, wearing a simple white shirt, dark vest, and trail-worn boots, but his stance spoke of confidence, and his eyes, direct and thoughtful, held none of the dismissive judgment she'd seen in the Blackwoods. "Miss Winters," he said, touching the brim of the hat he held in his hands, "I hope you'll pardon the early call. I wanted to catch you before you headed into town." "Mr. Cooper," she managed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "How may I help?" "You? Actually," he said, "I'm hoping I might help you." He gestured to one of the parlor chairs, waiting for her to sit before taking his own seat. "I was at the station yesterday. What happened there? It wasn't right." Sarah's cheeks burned. "I don't need pity, Mr. Cooper." "Good," he replied, surprising her with a slight smile, "because I'm not offering any. What I am offering is a job. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is returning to San Francisco to care for her ailing sister. I need someone to manage the household at Willow Creek Ranch, someone educated who can keep books and run a proper household." He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket, a deed, Sarah realized, as he spread it on the small table between them. The paper crackled with age and importance, showing the vast extent of Willow Creek Ranch. "It's a big responsibility," he continued. "The house staff includes a cook and 2 maids. You'd oversee ordering supplies, managing the household accounts, and ensuring everything runs smoothly. The position comes with private quarters in the main house, all meals, and a fair salary." Sarah studied the deed, her mind racing. The position he described was far more substantial than the shop work she'd hoped to find. But, "Why me? You don't know anything about me. I know you arrived here yesterday prepared to build a new life. I know you carried yourself with dignity when others showed none, and I suspect you're someone who understands the value of hard work and honest opportunity." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "The choice is yours, Miss Winters. If you're interested, my driver can pick you up at noon. If not, no hard feelings, and I'll still be happy to provide a reference for any position you seek in town." After he left, Mrs. Henderson appeared with a fresh pot of coffee and an expectant look. "Well," Sarah traced her finger along the lines of the deed that still lay on the table. "It seems too good to be true. Jackson Cooper's known for being unconventional," Mrs. Henderson said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "But he's also known for being scrupulously honest. When he bought out the mercantile 5 years ago, he kept on every employee and improved their wages. When drought hit 3 years back, he extended credit to half the farms in the county. She stirred sugar into her coffee. Of course, living at the ranch, managing his household, people will talk. People are already talking, Sarah said quietly, thinking of the whispers and stares she'd endured yesterday. True enough, Mrs. Henderson smiled. And at least this way they'll be talking about you while you're earning a good wage and sleeping in a comfortable bed. Sarah looked down at her worn shoes, then out the window, where the sun was climbing higher over Promise Creek. She thought of the $3.42 in her reticule, of the countless shops she'd planned to visit begging for work, of Thomas Blackwood's downcast eyes and his mother's cruel words. What time did he say that driver was coming? Mrs. Henderson's smile widened. Noon, just enough time to help you pack your carpet bag. The journey to Willow Creek Ranch took nearly 2 hours, though Promise Creek's church steeple remained visible for the first mile, shrinking behind them like a farewell gesture. Sarah sat straight-backed in Mr. Cooper's carriage, her carpet bag secure at her feet, watching as the town gave way to rolling grassland dotted with grazing cattle. The driver, an elderly man who'd introduced himself as Hank, occasionally pointed out landmarks. That's Cooper Creek yonder, feeds right into the main river. Mr. Jackson had them willows planted along the banks when he first bought the place. Said his mama always loved willow trees. They crested a small rise, and Sarah caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home. Willow Creek Ranch's main house stood proud against the afternoon sky, a 2-story structure of solid timber and native stone. A broad porch wrapped around both floors, and smoke curled invitingly from 2 chimneys. Ranch office is round back, Hank offered, guiding the horses toward the house. That's where Mr. Jackson keeps all the ledgers and such. Does most of his business right here instead of going into town these days. The mention of ledgers reminded Sarah of her new responsibilities. Mr. Cooper had promised to show her the books after she got settled, and her fingers itched to see how the accounts were organized. Back in her parents' shop, she'd prided herself on keeping immaculate records. A slender Chinese woman in a crisp black dress waited on the porch. She descended the steps as the carriage came to a stop, her expression welcoming but businesslike. Miss Winters, I'm Mrs. Chen. Mr. Cooper asked me to show you the house before I leave for San Francisco tomorrow. She helped Sarah down from the carriage with a firm grip. Your quarters are upstairs, but first you'll want to see the kitchen and study. That's where most of your work will begin. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of introductions and information. Sarah met May, the cheerful cook whose domain was a vast kitchen filled with gleaming copper pots and the aroma of baking bread. 2 young maids, sisters named Ruth and Rebecca, curtsied shyly before hurrying back to their duties. Mrs. Chen led her through the house's main rooms, explaining weekly cleaning schedules, laundry routines, and the particular habits of regular visitors. Mr. Cooper takes breakfast precisely at 7, Mrs. Chen said, as they climbed the stairs. He's not fussy about the food, but he likes to review the day's plans while he eats. You'll find the ranch ledger helpful for that. It's in the study. And he updates it every evening. Sarah's quarters turned out to be a bright corner room with windows facing both east and south. A 4-poster bed, dresser, and small writing desk filled the space comfortably without crowding it. A blue and white quilt covered the bed, and crisp curtains stirred in the afternoon breeze. My own room? Sarah couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. She'd expected servants' quarters, perhaps shared with the maids. The housekeeper's position here comes with certain responsibilities and privileges, Mrs. Chen said with a small smile. Mr. Cooper believes in treating his staff with respect. She paused, then added more softly, that's something you'll learn about him. He judges people by their work and character, not their circumstances. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jackson Cooper himself stood in the doorway, still dusty from riding. Pardon the interruption, ladies. Miss Winters, once you're settled, would you join me in the study? I'd like to go over the accounts before supper. Of course, Mr. Cooper. Sarah smoothed her skirt, suddenly conscious of how plain her best dress must look in these surroundings. The blue ledger on my desk, he said, already turning to leave. "Take a look through it first. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on our bookkeeping system." After he'd gone, Mrs. Chen gave Sarah an appraising look. "He doesn't show the ranch accounts to just anyone. You must have impressed him somehow." Sarah thought of the deed he'd shown her that morning, of his quiet confidence in offering her this position. "I hope I can justify his trust. Do your best work, be honest, and remember that everyone here was new once," Mrs. Chen advised. "Now I'll leave you to freshen up. The study is at the end of the downstairs hall. You can't miss it. And Miss Winters, welcome to Willow Creek." A week into her new position, Sarah sat at her small desk in her room, sketching a rough map of Willow Creek Ranch by lamplight. Her careful lines traced fence lines and water sources, grazing areas and cattle trails. Each morning's conversation with Mr. Cooper had added new details to her understanding, and she was determined to learn every aspect of the ranch's operations. "The north pasture needs new fencing come spring," she murmured to herself, making a note on her drawing, "and the East Creek crossing will need reinforcement before the autumn rains." A knock at her door startled her. "Miss Winters," it was Jackson Cooper's voice. "I apologize for the late hour, but there's something you should see." Sarah found him on the back porch, his face grave in the moonlight, the hands spotted storm. "Clouds building to the west. We'll need to move the herd from the lower pasture before morning." He hesitated. "I know it's not part of your duties, but I thought you might want to observe. Understanding the outdoor operations will help with managing the accounts." "I'd like that very much," Sarah said, trying to contain her excitement. She'd watched the ranch hands at work from a distance, but had never seen a night drive. "Where?" "Something sturdy," he advised. "May keeps extra gear in the mudroom." 30 minutes later, Sarah sat astride a gentle mare named Daisy, wearing a borrowed oilskin coat over her dress. Ranch hands moved through the darkness around them, their calls low and steady as they guided the cattle. Lightning flickered on. The horizon and the air held the sharp smell of approaching rain. "Watch how they move," Jackson said quietly, riding beside her. "Cattle are creatures of habit. Spook them and you'll have chaos. Guide them gentle. They'll follow where you lead." Something in his voice made Sarah think he wasn't just talking about cattle. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as they reached the upper pasture. Sarah's map had shown her this was the highest ground on the ranch, with natural windbreaks, formed by stands of oak trees. Now she saw how the cattle settled quickly into the familiar territory, even as the storm began in earnest. "You're good with that horse," Jackson observed as they rode back through the rain. "Have you ridden before?" "My father taught me," Sarah said, remembering summer rides through gentler country. "Before he fell ill, we used to ride every Sunday after church." Jackson nodded, and they rode in comfortable silence until the barn lights came into view. The storm was full upon them now, but Sarah felt oddly exhilarated. Her clothes were soaked despite the oilskin, her hair had come loose from its pins, and she knew she looked a fright, but she felt more alive than she had in months. "Thank you," she said as they dismounted in the barn's warmth, "for letting me come along." "You did well out there," he replied, helping her down. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, and for a moment they stood close enough that Sarah could see raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's still a working day." Back in her room, Sarah added new details to her map: the subtle slope of the upper pasture, the placement of the oak groves, the twisting path they'd followed in the dark. Her hands still trembled slightly from the night's excitement, and her cheeks felt warm, remembering that moment in the barn. "Don't be foolish," she told herself firmly. "He's your employer, nothing more." But as she readied herself for bed, she couldn't help glancing at her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. The woman who looked back at her was different from the one who'd stepped off the train just a week ago. Her cheeks were flushed with color, her eyes bright. Even her hair, still damp and curling wildly around her face, seemed to speak of new possibilities. Outside her window, the storm raged on, But Sarah fell asleep to the sound of the rain and dreamed of riding through the darkness with Jackson Cooper by her side, his voice low and steady, teaching her the secrets of the land that was becoming her home. The Promise Creek Weekly Gazette rustled in someone's hands as Sarah entered the general store. She caught a glimpse of the society column before the reader. One of Promise Creek's many well-dressed matrons quickly folded the paper away. But not before Sarah saw her own name in print. Former mail-order bride finds position at prominent ranch. Miss Winters. Mr. Peterson, the store clerk, hurried forward. Mr. Cooper's usual order is ready, though he glanced at the lengthy list in her hand. I see you have some additions. Yes, Sarah said firmly, refusing to acknowledge the whispers behind her. We'll need additional supplies for the harvest crew next week, and Mr. Cooper asked me to review our standing orders. I've found some areas where we might adjust quantities. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah's spine stiffened as she recognized the sharp tap of Mrs. Blackwood's heels on the wooden floor. Thomas trailed behind his mother like a shadow, just as he had that day at the train station. Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Blackwood's voice carried clearly across the store. I trust you haven't extended credit to certain individuals. Some people, having failed to secure a respectable position through proper channels, might seek to take advantage. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the order list, but her voice remained steady. Everything will be charged to the Willow Creek Ranch account. As usual, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Cooper has authorized all purchases. Of course, Miss Winters. Mr. Peterson nodded, his own tone professionally neutral. Mr. Cooper's credit is excellent. I'll have everything delivered this afternoon. How convenient. Mrs. Blackwood's words dripped with insinuation. To have such authority over another man's accounts, especially a man of Mr. Cooper's standing. Sarah turned slowly, meeting the older woman's gaze. She thought of Jackson's trust in giving, her responsibility for the household, of Mrs. Chen's respect, of the ranch hands who tipped their hats to her now when she passed. Yes, Mrs. Blackwood, it is convenient. That's why Mr. Cooper hired me, for my competence with accounts and household management. Good day. She moved to leave, but Thomas stepped forward. Sarah, I wanted to apologize. No need, Mr. Blackwood, Sarah interrupted, her voice cool. Your family's position was made quite clear. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to. She walked out with her head high, but her composure cracked when a familiar voice called out from the boardwalk. Well handled, Miss Winters. Jackson Cooper stood beside his horse, clearly having witnessed the entire exchange. Mr. Cooper, I didn't expect, that is, I thought you were meeting with the cattle buyers today. Finished early. His eyes held a glint of something like pride. Thought I'd ride in and see how the supply order was coming along. Join me for coffee at the hotel restaurant? We should discuss those quantity adjustments you mentioned. Sarah felt the weight of watching eyes from the store window, could practically hear the whispers that would follow. But Jackson's expression was entirely professional, his manner respectful. Thank you, yes. I have several suggestions for improving our ordering efficiency. They walked together to the hotel, Jackson shortening his stride to match hers. In the restaurant, he held her chair and signaled for coffee before taking his own seat. Now, he said, pulling out a small notebook, tell me about these adjustments you're proposing. For the next hour, they discussed household management, supply costs, and ways to streamline the ranch's operations. Sarah found herself relaxing as they talked, sharing ideas she'd been considering since reviewing the accounts. You've got a good head for business, Jackson commented as they finished their coffee. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Walking back to where Hank waited with the wagon, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a shop window. She looked different somehow, confident, professional, despite her simple dress and limited means. The woman in the glass wasn't a rejected mail-order bride or a subject of gossip. She was the capable manager of Willow Creek Ranch's household, chosen for her skills and trusted with responsibility. Until dinner, Miss Winters, Jackson said as he helped her into the wagon. His hand was warm around hers, his grip lingering, just a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Until dinner, Mr. Cooper," she replied, and found herself smiling all the way back to the ranch. Late one evening, Sarah sat in the ranch office, surrounded by stacks of old ledgers. She'd been studying them for weeks now, first trying to understand Jackson's system, then beginning to see patterns and possibilities. Her own notebook was filled with calculations and ideas, but she'd hesitated to share them until she was certain. "Still at it?" Jackson's voice from the doorway made her jump. He stood there in his shirt sleeves, looking tired but curious. "It's well past dinner time." "Mr. Cooper, I'm sorry, I lost track of time." Sarah began gathering her papers, but he waved her back to her seat. "Don't stop on my account. What has you so fascinated?" He pulled up a chair beside her, close enough that she caught the scent of leather and sunshine that always seemed to follow him. Sarah took a deep breath. "I've been reviewing the quarterly accounts, and I noticed something." She pulled out her notebook, pages covered in neat columns of figures. "The ranch's operating costs follow a seasonal pattern, but we're not taking full advantage of market fluctuations." Jackson leaned closer, studying her calculations. "Go on." "If we adjust our bulk purchasing schedule, buying feed in early, spring instead of late summer, for instance, we could reduce costs by nearly 15%. She showed him the comparative figures she'd worked out. "And I found 3 suppliers in Carson City willing to offer better prices than our current merchants, especially for larger orders." "Carson City?" His eyebrows rose. "That's quite a bit of research." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. I've been writing letters. My father taught me that good business means always looking for better opportunities." She hesitated, then added, "He owned Morgan's Millinery in Sacramento before we moved east. I helped with his books from the time I was 12. Jackson was silent for a long moment, studying her figures. "Why didn't you mention this experience before?" "I wasn't sure it would matter," Sarah admitted. "A small millinery shop is hardly comparable to a ranch this size." "Business is business," Jackson said firmly. "Good accounting practices work anywhere." He picked up her notebook, flipping through the pages of careful calculations. "These suggestions could save us a considerable sum over the year. Would you be willing to implement them?" Sarah blinked. "You trust my judgment on this? You've shown me detailed research, solid calculations, and initiative in contacting new suppliers. Why wouldn't I trust that?" His eyes met hers, serious, but warm. "I've seen how you handle the household accounts, Sarah. You have a gift for this." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in her chest fluttered at the sound of it. "There's more," she said quickly, trying to stay focused. "I've designed a new accounting system that could help track individual herd profitability." She pulled out several sheets covered in carefully drawn grids. Each section would record breeding records, feed costs, and sale prices for different groups of cattle. "Over time, we could identify which bloodlines are most profitable." Jackson studied the new system, asking questions that showed he grasped its potential immediately. His shoulder brushed against hers as they bent over the papers together, and Sarah found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on numbers and calculations. "Implement all of it," he said finally, sitting back. "The new purchasing schedule, the supplier contacts, and this tracking system. I'll have Rogers clear space in here for your own desk. You'll need it for this kind of work." "My own?" Sarah looked around the office, trying to imagine having a permanent place in this room. "Are you sure?" "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time." He stood, gathering her papers into a neat stack and handing them back to her. "You're not just a housekeeper anymore, Sarah. Consider yourself promoted to ranch accountant as well, with a corresponding increase in salary, of course." She clutched the papers to her chest, overwhelmed. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Thank you, Jackson," he said softly. "I think, given your new position, you should call me Jackson." Their eyes met again, and this time Sarah couldn't ignore the warmth that bloomed in her chest. "Thank you, Jackson." He nodded, moving toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's Going to be a busy day. We have a new accounting system to implement. He paused in the doorway, looking back at her. I'm glad you're here, Sarah. Willow Creek Ranch is better for having you. Long after he'd gone, Sarah sat in the quiet office, running her fingers over her notebook full of figures and possibilities. She'd come to Promise Creek seeking a new life, and somehow, despite everything, or perhaps because of it, she'd found one she'd never dared to imagine. The damaged fence post lay on Sarah's desk like an accusation. 3 feet of weathered wood, split clean through by lightning. One of dozens destroyed in the sudden storm that had swept across Willow Creek Ranch just before dawn. South pasture. Fence lines down for nearly a mile, Rogers reported grimly. Storm spooked the cattle something fierce. Half the herd scattered into Moore's property. Jackson paced the office, his usual calm demeanor strained. Moore's been looking for any excuse to cause trouble. If those cattle damage his crops... There's worse, Rogers continued. Creeks rising fast. If we don't get them back before... It floods. They'll be trapped on the wrong side, Jackson finished. He turned to Sarah, who was already pulling out her map of the ranch. Those new cattle we just bought, what was their total value? $12,000, Sarah answered, without hesitation. Almost a quarter of our operating capital for the year. Lightning flashed outside, followed almost immediately by a thunderclap that rattled the windows. The storm was returning. We need every hand we can get, Jackson said, shrugging into his oilskin coat. Rogers, round up everyone. I'm coming. 2, Sarah interrupted, standing up. Sarah, no. It's too dangerous. I can ride as well as any of your hands, she insisted. And I know exactly which cattle we're looking for. I helped record every marking when they arrived. She pulled her own copy of the cattle records from her desk. We can't afford to lose them, Jackson. You know I'm right. Their eyes met across the desk, and Sarah saw the moment he accepted her logic. Stay close to me, he finally said, and if I tell you to head back, I'll use my own judgment, she finished firmly, already reaching for her borrowed coat. An hour later, Sarah rode through sheets of rain beside Jackson, watching his hands guide the scattered cattle back toward Willow Creek land. Her hair was plastered to her face, her skirts were soaked through, but she felt eerily calm as she called out the identifying marks of each animal they found. White face, split ear on the left, she shouted over the storm. That's one of the new ones. The creek was a roaring threat to their left, its banks already overflowing. They'd managed to gather most of the herd, but 3 valuable bulls were still missing. There, Jackson pointed to a cluster of trees where dark shapes moved. In the gloom, the missing bulls, but they were on the wrong side of a rapidly rising stream, a tributary of the main creek. The old crossing, Sarah called out, remembering her map. There's a shallow point 50 yards upstream. Jackson nodded, and they rode hard through the rain. The crossing was barely visible, but Sarah had studied every detail of the ranches. Waterways. She watched in terror as Jackson guided his horse into the rushing water, leading the way. The current pulled at his mount's legs, but they made it across. Stay there, he shouted back to her. I'll drive them around. But Sarah was already urging Daisy forward. She couldn't let him face this alone. The water was shockingly cold, as it swept past her horse's flanks, and for a moment she thought they might be carried away. Then Daisy's hooves found purchase on the far bank, and they were across. Together they worked the bulls away from the trees and toward the crossing. The animals were reluctant to move, but Sarah had learned more about cattle handling than she'd ever expected to need. She used her voice and her horse's presence, just as she'd seen Jackson do, guiding rather than forcing. Almost there, Jackson called encouragingly as the first bull stepped into the water. Easy now. The crossing seemed to take forever, but finally all 3 bulls were safely on the right side of the stream. Sarah turned Daisy to follow, but a massive crack of lightning split the sky. The horse reared in terror, and Sarah felt herself slipping from the saddle. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Somehow Jackson had reached her in time, pulling her against his chest as Daisy bolted away. "I've got you," he said hoarsely, his heart pounding against her cheek. "I've got you, Sarah." They stayed like that for a long moment, rain pouring. Down around them, his arms tight around her waist. When he finally set her on her feet, his hands lingered at her sides. "We should get back," he said, but he made no move to release her. "Yes," Sarah whispered, looking up at him. Rain dripped from his hat brim, and his eyes were dark with something more than concern. Thunder rolled overhead, breaking the spell. Jackson helped her mount behind him on his horse, and her arms went around his waist as they rode back toward the ranch. Sarah told herself she held on so tightly because of the storm, but they both knew it wasn't true. The Promise Creek harvest. Festival was the social event of the season, and Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she pinned up her hair. She'd used part of her new salary to buy fabric for a new dress. Deep green silk that May had helped her sew into something far more elegant than anything she'd owned before. "Miss Sarah?" Ruth knocked softly before entering with a small envelope. "This just came from Mr. Cooper." Inside was a dance card, already filled out in Jackson's steady hand. "Save me the first dance, J." Sarah touched the card gently, remembering his words from breakfast. "As ranch accountant, your presence at the festival is expected. We should arrive together, for propriety's sake, of course." Now, hearing his boots on the stairs, she tucked the dance card into her pocket and took a final look in the mirror. The woman who gazed back seemed both familiar and strange. Still, Sarah Winters, but somehow more. "You look beautiful." Jackson's voice came from her doorway. He wore a formal black suit that made him even more handsome than usual, if that was possible. "Thank you," she managed, taking his offered arm. "For everything." The festival was held in the town hall, decorated with autumn leaves and golden bunting. As they entered, Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the room, heard the whispers start immediately. But Jackson's arm was steady under her hand as he led her through the crowd. "Miss Winters! Mr. Cooper!" Mrs. Henderson approached with a warm smile. "How lovely to see you both. Sarah, dear, that color suits you perfectly." Before Sarah could respond, the music started, a gentle waltz. Jackson turned to her with a slight bow. "I believe this one is mine." He led her onto the dance floor with confident grace. Sarah had learned to dance years ago, but she'd never had a partner who made it feel so natural, so right. His hand was warm at her waist, and she found herself relaxing into the movement despite the watching crowd. "You're a wonderful dancer," she said softly. "My mother insisted on lessons," he replied with a small smile. "Said a man should know how to lead properly, in dancing and in life." His eyes met hers. "She would have liked you, Sarah." The music swelled around them, and for a moment, Sarah forgot about the whispers, forgot about propriety, forgot about everything except the way Jackson was looking at her. Then a sharp voice cut through her reverie. "Really, Thomas, I don't know why you're so concerned. It's clear she's found a position that suits her." Mrs. Blackwood stood near the refreshment table with Thomas, her voice carefully pitched. "To carry." But before her words could sting, Jackson smoothly turned their dance, putting his broad shoulders between Sarah and the Blackwoods. "Ignore them," he murmured. "You belong here, Sarah, more than they ever will." As if to prove his point, other couples began approaching between dances. Ranchers wanted to discuss her innovative accounting methods. Their wives, seeing Jackson's clear respect for her, offered tentative friendships. Even the bank president commented on the improved efficiency of Willow Creek Ranch's financial records. "Your Miss Winters has quite a head for business," Sarah overheard him tell Jackson. "We could use that kind of thinking at the bank." "She's not my Miss Winters," Jackson replied evenly. "She's her own woman, but you're right about her capabilities." Later, as they walked out under the harvest moon, Jackson helped Sarah into the carriage with careful hands. "You were the talk of the festival," he said as they started toward home, though not in the way some people expected. "Because of the accounting innovations? Because you showed them who you really are." His voice was soft in the darkness. "The same way you showed me." Sarah fingered the dance card in her pocket, thinking of how far she'd come from that first day at the train station. "Thank you for giving me the chance, Sarah." Jackson's hand found hers in the darkness. "You did this yourself. I just had the good fortune to recognize what was right in front of me." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm while the harvest moon lit their way home. Sarah found Jackson in his study one Sunday afternoon, holding an old photograph. He stood by the window, lost in thought, until she quietly cleared her throat. "I'm sorry," she said. "I can come back?" "No, stay." He gestured her closer, holding out the photograph. "I was just thinking about them." The image showed a couple standing in front of a small cabin. The woman wore a simple dress and a determined smile. The man's work-worn hands and proud stance reminded Sarah powerfully of Jackson. "Your parents?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Taken the year they homesteaded this land. Back then, Willow Creek Ranch was nothing but a cabin and 50 acres of hope." He traced the edge of the frame. "My father worked other men's cattle 6 days a week, saved every penny. My mother took in washing, grew a garden that could feed an army." Sarah studied the photograph, seeing echoes of Jackson in his father's stance, his mother's resolute expression. "They built all this, acre by acre." His voice held quiet pride. "Every time they could afford a few more cattle, a little more land. Mother always said wealth wasn't about what you had, but what you did with it." He glanced at Sarah. "She'd have understood you, I think. Coming here with nothing but determination and skill." "My parents were the same way," Sarah said softly. "The millinery shop was their dream. They started with one sewing machine in our front room." She smiled at the memory. "Mother could trim a hat that would make a duchess envious, and father could calculate profit margins in his head." Jackson set the photograph on his desk, turning to face her fully. "Tell me about them." And somehow, sitting in the warm afternoon light, Sarah found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone since their deaths, about her father teaching her bookkeeping on quiet Sunday afternoons, her mother's insistence that education and integrity mattered more than fine dresses. "They sound like remarkable people," Jackson said when she finished. "Is that where you learned it?" "Learned what?" "To face the world with such grace, to work without complaint, to see value in people beyond their surface." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I could say the same about your parents' influence on you, the way you treat everyone who works here, the opportunities you give people." "Like the opportunity I gave you?" His voice was gentle. "That was different," she said quietly. "You saw me at my lowest moment, and still I saw you," he corrected. "Just you, Sarah. The same way you see me, not as the rich rancher, but as the son of 2 people who worked their whole lives to build something worthwhile." He picked up the photograph again. "Mother used to say real partnerships were built on shared values, not shared circumstances." The word partnerships hung in the air between them, full of unspoken meaning. "They would be proud," Sarah said softly, "of how you've grown their dream, and yours would be proud of how you've rebuilt your life." He set the photograph down. "Again, but this time closer to Sarah's side of the desk. This is part of your history now, too. The ranch, its legacy, all of it." Their eyes met, and Sarah felt the shift in the air, the acknowledgement that something was changing between them, had been changing since that first day at the train station. "I should check on dinner," she said finally, though she made no move to leave. "Sarah," Jackson's voice stopped her as she reached the door. Would you join me for a private supper tomorrow evening? There are things I'd like to discuss." Her heart stuttered at his tone, at the look in his eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that." As she walked back to the kitchen, Sarah's hands trembled slightly, but not from fear or uncertainty. For the first time since coming to Promise Creek, she felt she was exactly where she was meant to be, walking a path her parents would have understood and blessed. And tomorrow held possibilities she'd never dared to dream of when she first stepped off that train. The small velvet box sat unopened on Jackson's desk while he paced the study. Sarah watched him from her chair, her heart racing as he struggled to find words. something she'd never seen him do before. "I had a whole speech prepared," he said finally, running a hand through his hair, "about the ranch's future, about partnership opportunities, about combining our business acumen." He stopped pacing, turning to face her. "But sitting here with you now, none of that seems to matter as much as the simple truth." "Which is?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Jackson picked up the velvet box, but didn't open it yet. "When you stepped off that train, something changed at Willow Creek Ranch. You brought life and intelligence and grace to everything you touched. The accounts improved, yes, but more than that, you improved us. All of us." He smiled softly. "Especially me." He knelt beside her chair, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "I watched you rebuild your life with dignity and determination. I saw you face down gossip with grace, master new skills with enthusiasm, and turn every challenge into an opportunity. And somewhere along the way, without even trying, you became essential, not just to the ranch, but to me." His hands trembled slightly as he opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my mother's. She made me promise I'd only give it to someone who understood that true worth isn't measured in dollars or social standing, but in character and determination." "Jackson," Sarah's eyes filled with tears, "I'm not offering you a position anymore, Sarah. I'm offering you a life, a partnership in every sense of the word." His eyes held hers, vulnerable and hopeful. "I love you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you hold your head high in the face of rejection. I know I'm asking you to take another chance on marriage, and if you need time—" "Yes," Sarah interrupted, her heart too full to wait another moment. "Yes to time, or yes to—" She slid from her chair to kneel beside him, taking his face in her hands. "Yes to you. Yes to partnership. Yes to love. Yes to all of it." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Jackson's hands shook as he placed it there, then lifted her fingers to his lips. "I had a whole business proposal prepared too," he said with a soft laugh, "about making you full partner in the ranch operations, sharing the profits, expanding our holdings. We can discuss business tomorrow." Sarah's fingers traced his cheek. "Right now, I just want to remember this moment, how it feels, how you look at me, how I'll look at you for the rest of our lives," he promised, drawing her closer. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, like a question finally being answered. The second was deeper, fuller, years of growing love and trust flowing between them. When they finally parted, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done this months ago." "No," Sarah said softly. "This was the perfect time. We needed to build trust first, to know each other's hearts." She looked down at the ring, its pearl glowing softly in the lamplight. "To understand that we're stronger together than apart." Jackson stood, pulling her up with him. "I'll make the announcements tomorrow, unless—" He hesitated. "Would you prefer a long engagement?" Sarah thought of the journey that had brought her here, from desperate mail-order bride to confident businesswoman, from stranger to beloved partner. "I think we've waited long enough, don't you?" His smile lit up his entire face. "I'll send for the preacher whenever you're ready." 2 weeks, she decided. Time enough for a proper wedding, but not so long that people think we're unsure. She grinned. "Besides, the ranch books need closing for the quarter, and I'd rather do it as Mrs. Cooper." Jackson laughed, pulling her close again. "My practical, beautiful bride, how did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Sarah corrected, thinking of that day at the train station. "Sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments." She caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window, her in her simple dress, him in his work clothes, both glowing with joy. Not a fancy couple, perhaps, but a genuine partnership, just as their parents would have wanted. The marriage license lay on the courthouse desk, its ink still drying. Sarah watched as Jackson signed his name with a steady hand, then passed the pen to her. As she wrote Sarah Cooper for the first time, she felt the weight of the moment. Not just a new name, but a new chapter beginning. "That's all in order," Judge Martinez said warmly, "though I must say this is the smallest wedding party I've seen in quite some time." Sarah smiled, glancing at their only witnesses, Mrs. Henderson and Rogers. They'd chosen a private ceremony, saving the celebrations for the ranch gathering later. No elaborate church wedding, no society spectacle, just 4 people in the judge's office and 2 hearts ready to join as one. "Sometimes the smallest ceremonies mean the most," Mrs. Henderson observed, dabbing at her eyes, "especially when they're built on something real." Back at the ranch, the transformation awaited them. The hands had decorated the main house with wildflowers and ribbons, and May had outdone herself preparing a feast. But it was the study that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. A second desk had been installed beside Jackson's, with a brass nameplate reading, "Mrs. Sarah Cooper, partner." "Welcome home," Jackson whispered, squeezing her hand. The celebration was everything Sarah could have wished for. Ranch hands and their families gathered in the yard, sharing food and stories. Children played tag between the tables, and even the most weathered cowboys had smiles on their faces. "Speech!" someone called out as the sun began to set. "Speech from the happy couple." Jackson stood, drawing Sarah up beside him. "I could talk about luck," he began, his voice carrying across the yard, about how fortune smiled on Willow Creek Ranch the day Sarah stepped off that train. But it wasn't luck that built this partnership. It was hard work, determination, and the kind of courage that turns setbacks into stepping stones. He turned to face her fully. Sarah didn't just bring her business skills to the ranch. She brought her heart, her integrity, and her vision of what we could become together. She made us better, made me better, by believing in the power of true partnership. Sarah squeezed his hand, finding her own voice. "When I came to Promise Creek, I thought I was seeking security. What I found instead was purpose. This ranch, these people." She looked around at the faces that had become family. "You didn't just give me a place to work. You gave me a home." Later that evening, as lanterns twinkled in the gathering dusk, and fiddle music floated on the air, Sarah and Jackson slipped away to the porch. She wore a simple white dress, not the elaborate gown she'd once imagined as a mail-order bride, but one that felt truly her. "Happy?" Jackson asked softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "More than I ever thought possible." She leaned back against him, watching the celebration continue in the yard. "Though I keep thinking about tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Those cattle contracts won't review themselves, and the quarterly report." Jackson's laugh rumbled through his chest. "My beautiful bride, already thinking about business." "Your beautiful partner," she corrected with a smile. "In all things." "In all things," he agreed, turning her to face him. "But maybe we can let the contracts wait until the day after tomorrow." Sarah reached up to touch his cheek, remembering all the moments that had led them here. The rejection at the train station, that first night drive with the cattle, the storm that had brought them closer, the quiet evenings working side by side in the study. "I love you," she said simply. "Not just for giving me a chance that day, but for seeing me as an equal, for building this with me." His kiss was gentle, full of promise. When they parted, the fiddle music had changed to a slow waltz. "Dance with me, Mrs. Cooper?" She took his offered hand, following him down the porch steps. As they swayed together under the stars, Sarah caught Mrs. Henderson's knowing smile, saw Rogers tip his hat in approval. This, she realized, was what her parents had tried to teach her about. True partnership. 2 people building something greater than themselves, supported by a community that had become family. And tomorrow they would begin their shared future, one careful step at a time, just as they had learned to dance together. The town council minutes recorded it simply: "Motion to establish Promise Creek's first Women's Business Association, proposed by Mrs. Sarah Cooper of Willow Creek Ranch." But the ripples from that single line spread through the community like waves in a still pond. It had started with Martha Jensen, a widow struggling to keep her husband's general store afloat. She'd come to Sarah after hearing about the innovations at Willow Creek Ranch, hoping for advice. Sarah had spent an afternoon reviewing the store's books, showing Martha the same inventory management system she'd developed for the ranch. A week later, Emma Patterson, who ran the town's bakery, asked for similar help. Then came Rebecca Mills with her dressmaking shop and Catherine Walsh with her boarding house. "You've started something," Jackson observed one evening, finding Sarah at her desk surrounded by ledgers from various businesses. "Half the women in town are talking about your bookkeeping classes." "They just needed someone to show them how," Sarah replied, looking up from her work. "Most of them already had good business sense. They just lacked confidence in their own judgment." The council meeting room was packed the day Sarah presented her proposal. Women business owners filled the back rows while their husbands sat forward with skeptical expressions. Sarah stood at the podium, her voice clear and steady. "Promise Creek is growing," she began. "Our businesses need every advantage to compete with larger towns. The Women's Business Association will provide training in modern accounting methods, cooperative purchasing power, and mutual support for existing and new enterprises." She laid out the benefits methodically, how bulk ordering could reduce costs for everyone, how shared knowledge could prevent common mistakes, how stronger businesses meant a stronger town. Through it all, she felt Jackson's proud gaze from his seat on the council. Mrs. Cooper, Thomas Blackwood Sr., spoke from his place at the banker's table. "While your enthusiasm is admirable, surely you understand that complex business matters are exactly what these women handle every day," Sarah interrupted smoothly. "I've reviewed the books of 12 businesses in town. Everyone shows sound, underlying management. With proper training and support, they could expand their operations significantly." She smiled. "Requiring, of course, additional banking services." A murmur ran through the crowd. Thomas Sr. sat back, momentarily silenced by her deft handling of his objection. "I move to approve the proposal," Jackson said formally. "The benefits to our community are clear." "Seconded," called Mrs. Henderson from the audience. As a property owner, she had voting rights, something Sarah suspected many had forgotten. The motion passed, though not unanimously, but Sarah cared. Less about the vote than the faces of the women in the back of the room. She saw hope there, determination, and a new awareness of their own potential. "That was quite a speech," Jackson said later as they rode home together. "I don't think I've ever seen the old guard quite so flustered." "They'll adapt," Sarah said confidently, "especially when they see the results. Martha's store is already showing a 15% increase in profits since implementing the new system." Jackson reined his horse closer to hers. "You know what I love most about you? The way you see possibilities where others see problems. You did it with the ranch, and now you're doing it for the whole town. I learned it from you," she reminded him. "You saw possibility in me when everyone else saw a destitute mail-order bride." "No," he corrected gently. "I just saw you clearly. The same way you see these women, not for their circumstances, but for their potential." The autumn sun was setting behind them as they approached Willow Creek Ranch, painting the sky in shades of promise. Sarah thought of all the twists and turns that had led her here, of how rejection had opened the door to something far better than she'd originally hoped for. "We're going to change things," she said softly. "Not just the ranch, not just the businesses, the whole way people think about what's possible." Jackson reached across the space between them, taking her hand. "Together," he agreed. "That's how all the best changes happen." The drought records told a grim story. Sarah studied the yellowed pages from previous years, comparing them to their current situation. 3 months without significant rain, wells running low, grass turning brown and brittle across the pastures. "Moore's selling his cattle at half price," Jackson reported, entering the study with dust on his coat and worry in his eyes. "Carson's already sold out completely. They're saying this could be the worst drought since '62. Sarah pushed the records aside, pulling out their current ledger. "How long can we maintain the herd with the remaining water? Maybe 6 weeks. We're hauling from the North Creek, but it's slowing to a trickle." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing on End. If we don't get rain soon, then we adapt, Sarah said firmly. Show me the water survey maps again. They spread the maps across her desk, studying the network of creeks and springs that fed the ranch. Sarah traced the lines with her finger, remembering something she'd noticed during her first weeks here. The old mining tunnels, she said suddenly. The ones that run under the East Ridge. You said they always had water in them. Jackson straightened. They're dangerous, Sarah. That's why we sealed them off. But the water's still there, isn't it? Underground springs feeding them. She pulled out her own map of the ranch, the one she'd drawn that first month. Look, they're higher than the main pastures. If we could channel that water, it would take significant engineering and capital we don't have right now. Sarah was already pulling out calculations. We have the money I saved on feed contracts and... She hesitated. I still have my mother's silver thimble. Other pieces too. They're worth something. Sarah, no, those are your memories. And this ranch is our future. She took his hand. My parents built their business from nothing. They taught me that sometimes you have to risk what you have to protect what matters. Jackson studied her face for a long moment. You really think this could work? I think we have to try, not just for us, but for everyone who depends on this ranch. She squeezed his hand. We're partners, remember? In good times and bad. The next weeks were a blur of activity. Engineers were consulted, plans drawn up. Sarah sold her silver, adding the funds to their carefully managed reserves. Ranch hands dug channels and laid pipe, working through the heat of the day to redirect the underground water. The whole town watched and whispered. Some said they were fools to throw money at a lost cause. Others started calling Sarah that crazy Cooper woman behind her back. But she kept working, kept calculating, kept believing. The day they opened the first channel was like a miracle. Water flowed down the newly cut ditches, spreading life across the parched earth. It wasn't enough to save every pasture, but it was enough to keep their core herd alive. You did it, Jackson said softly, standing with her as they watched the water flow. We did it, she corrected, all of us together. That evening they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over their still struggling but surviving ranch. Sarah fingered the empty spot on her charm bracelet where her mother's thimble had hung. Do you regret it? Jackson asked, noticing the gesture. No. Sarah leaned against his shoulder. Mama always said things were just things. It's what you build with them that matters. Speaking of building, Jackson pulled a small package. From his pocket, I had this made to replace what you gave up. Inside was a silver charm in the shape of a water droplet, engraved with the date they'd opened the channels. So you'll remember, he said softly, that sometimes the biggest tests lead to the best solutions, and that faith in each other is worth more than silver. Sarah touched the charm gently, thinking of all they'd faced together. The drought wasn't over. They could see that in the dusty horizon and feel it in the hot wind, but they'd found a way forward, just as they always had. Whatever comes next, she said, we'll face it together. Together, Jackson agreed, pulling her close as the evening star appeared above their land. The way we do everything that matters. The letter arrived on a bright spring morning, Sarah's old name written in a once familiar hand. Miss Sarah Winters, care of Willow Creek Ranch. Just seeing it made her pause, remembering that hopeful girl who'd once treasured similar letters. Thomas Blackwood's handwriting, she murmured, showing the unopened envelope to Jackson across their shared desk. He must not have heard I'm married, or chose to ignore it, Jackson said quietly. Would you like me to send it back? Sarah shook her head. No. Whatever he has to say, I can face it now. The letter was 4 pages long, filled with explanations and apologies. Thomas wrote of regret, of standing up to his parents at last, of hoping to make amends. He'd heard of her success with the Women's Business Association, her handling of the drought crisis. He wanted to meet, to talk about what might have been. I was a coward that day at the station, Sarah read aloud, her voice steady. I've thought of you often, wondering if we could start again. Jackson sat silent, his face unreadable. What are you thinking? He finally asked. Sarah set the letter down, reaching for her wedding ring, the same pearl and diamond band. That had been Jackson's mother's. I'm thinking how strange life is. A year ago, this letter would have meant everything. Now I want to thank him. She smiled at Jackson's surprised expression. If he hadn't rejected me that day, I would never have found my true place, my true partner. The next afternoon, Sarah met Thomas in the town cafe, choosing a public place for what needed to be a public conversation. He stood as she approached, looking much the same as she remembered, handsome in a polished way, but somehow smaller than her memory of him. "Sarah," he began, you've changed. Life changes us all," she replied calmly, remaining standing. "I received your letter, Thomas. I'm Mrs. Cooper now." Yes, I'd heard. But Sarah, surely you can see I'm different now. I've learned to stand up to Mother, to make my own choices. No. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "There is no we, Thomas. There never really was. You wanted a proper wife to please your family. I wanted security. Neither of us knew what real partnership meant. And you found that. With Cooper, there was a hint of his mother's dismissiveness in his tone." Sarah thought of Jackson's quiet strength, his unwavering support, the way they'd faced every challenge, together. "I found everything I never knew I needed. Jackson didn't just offer me security, he offered me respect, trust, and the chance to become who I was meant to be. I could have given you security too," Thomas protested. "But you didn't." Sarah touched her wedding ring, "and I thank God every day for that blessing in disguise. Now, if you'll excuse me, my husband is waiting." She turned to leave, then paused. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Thomas. But more than that, I hope you learn to stand on your own before you ask someone else to stand with you." Jackson was waiting outside with their horses, his face lighting up at her approach. "All right, perfect," she said, letting him help her mount. "Sometimes you have to face your past to appreciate your present fully." As they rode home together, Sarah thought about the letter in her pocket, not Thomas's, but the one she'd written last night after reading his. A letter to her parents, telling them about the life she'd found, the love she'd discovered, the woman she'd become. "You're smiling," Jackson observed. "I was just thinking, remember when you said your mother believed real partnerships were built on shared values, not shared circumstances?" He nodded, guiding his horse closer to hers. She was right. What Thomas and I shared was circumstance, mutual desperation dressed up as opportunity. What we share, she reached for his hand, this is built on something real as it gets, Jackson agreed, his fingers warm around hers as they rode toward home. The schoolhouse plans lay spread across the town council table, meticulously drawn with notes in Sarah's careful hand. What had started as a simple idea during a Women's Business Association meeting had grown into something bigger, a vision for Promise Creek's future. "The current schoolroom above the Mercantile isn't enough anymore," Sarah explained to the council. "We have 38 children of school age now, with more coming as the town grows. They deserve better than a cramped space with poor lighting and no proper books." She'd done her homework thoroughly, as always. The proposed building would have large windows for natural light, proper desks, a small library, and even a science laboratory. Most importantly, it would have space for additional classes, including evening sessions for adults who wanted to improve their education. "The cost is considerable," Thomas Blackwood Sr. observed from his seat at the banker's table. "The investment will pay dividends," Sarah countered, pulling out her calculations. "Better educated children become more capable adults. More capable adults build stronger businesses." She smiled slightly. "Which need more banking services." A ripple of amusement went through the room. They'd learned to expect this kind of thorough planning from Sarah Cooper. "Willow Creek Ranch will donate the land," Jackson added from his council seat. 5 acres on the north edge of town, with good access to the main road. "And the Women's Business Association has already raised half the construction costs," Sarah continued. "We've also secured commitments from 15 local businesses to provide materials at cost." She saw the moment the council began to shift, their expressions moving from skepticism to consideration. But it was Martha Jensen who made the decisive argument, standing up from her place in the audience. My Jeremy couldn't read until Mrs. Cooper started tutoring him during her business meetings with me, she said clearly. Now he reads everything he can get his hands on. Imagine what he could do with a proper school. Other voices joined in. Parents whose children had benefited from Sarah's informal teaching. Business owners who saw the value of better education. Ranchers who wanted their children to have opportunities they'd never had. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Later that evening, Sarah and Jackson rode out to the proposed school site. The setting sun painted the empty field in shades of gold, and Sarah could almost see the building that would stand there, not just a school, but a symbol of Promise Creek's growth and ambition. You know what this reminds me of, Jackson said, dismounting to help her down. That first day in my study, when you showed me your ideas for improving the ranch's accounting system, you had the same look in your eyes then, like you could see possibilities no one else had noticed. Sarah squeezed his hand. I learned that from you. You saw possibility in me when everyone else saw just another poor mail-order bride. No, he corrected gently. I saw you, just like you see these children, not for what they are, but for what they could become with the right opportunities. They walked the property together, Sarah pointing out where each part of the school would stand. The main classroom here, the library there, the laboratory with its big north-facing windows. We'll need a proper teacher, she mused. Someone who understands that education is about more than just reading and figures. It's about teaching children to think, to question, to see possibilities. Like someone taught you? Sarah nodded, remembering her parents' insistence on education, their patience in teaching her business skills, their belief that knowledge was the one thing that couldn't be taken away. They'd be proud of you, Jackson said softly. Not just for this, but for everything you've built here. We've built, she corrected. Everything we've done together. As they rode home in the gathering dusk, Sarah thought about all the changes she'd seen in Promise Creek since that first difficult day. The town had grown, yes, but more than that, it had grown in the right ways, becoming more inclusive, more forward-thinking, more focused on building a future than maintaining old prejudices. Penny for your thoughts? Jackson asked. Sarah smiled. I was just thinking, sometimes the best gifts we can give are the ones that keep growing after we're gone. Like education, like opportunity, like faith in possibility. Like love, Jackson added quietly, and Sarah's heart swelled with the simple truth of it. The garden design was Sarah's idea, but it had quickly become their shared passion. What started as a simple sketch on the back of a ranch report had grown into an elaborate plan, a peaceful haven behind the main house, complete with winding paths, flower beds, and a small pond fed by the spring they discovered during the drought. My mother always wanted a proper garden, Jackson said one evening as they worked together, marking out the flower beds. She managed to grow a few roses, but there was never enough time with all the ranch work. Sarah paused in her measuring to watch him drive a stake into the ground. After more than a year of marriage, she still found herself struck by moments like this, the easy strength in his movements, the quiet tenderness in his voice when he spoke of his parents. Tell me more about her roses, she said softly. Yellow. Uns climbing up the porch posts? He smiled at the memory. She said they reminded her of sunshine, even on cloudy days. Father used to bring her cuttings whenever he rode into Carson City. Sarah made a note on their design. Then we'll plant yellow roses here, by the entrance, and maybe we could add some of those purple irises, like the ones my mother loved. A garden of memories, Jackson mused, moving to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. And new beginnings. The new beginnings part had been unexpected, but welcome news, shared just that morning. Sarah's hand drifted to her still flat stomach, and Jackson's covered it protectively. We don't have to do this now, he murmured. The garden can wait. No, Sarah said firmly. I want our child to have this, a place of beauty and peace, where they can learn about their grandparents through the flowers they loved. They worked until dusk, laying out paths and preparing soil. The ranch hands had offered to help, but this felt like something they needed to do themselves, a labor of love, creating something purely for joy rather than profit. I never thought I could be this happy, Sarah admitted, as they sat on the porch later watching the stars emerge. That day at the train station, when everything seemed to be falling apart. That day, you were exactly where you needed to be, Jackson finished. Even if neither of us knew it yet. She turned to study his face in the fading light. When did you know that this was more than just giving a desperate woman a chance? Jackson's fingers traced patterns on her palm. There were moments. The way you tackled the ranch accounts with such enthusiasm. How you held your head high in town despite the gossip. But I think I truly knew during that night drive in the storm. You were soaked through, probably terrified, but so determined to do your part. I remember thinking, this is what a real partner looks like. For me, it was the little things, Sarah said softly. How you always listened to my ideas, even when they seemed impossible. The way you made space for me in your study, your home, your life. How you saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just saw circumstances. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh-turned earth and promise from their newly marked garden. Soon it would be filled with flowers, yellow roses for his mother, purple irises for hers, and new varieties they would choose together. I was thinking, Jackson said, his hand settling protectively over her middle again. If it's a girl, we might name her Rose, or Iris, if you prefer. Sarah's heart swelled with love for this man who understood without being told how much that would mean to her. And if it's a boy, then we'll just have to plant twice as many flowers in his honor. She laughed, leaning into his embrace. I love you, Jackson Cooper, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Sarah Cooper, more every day. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear over their land. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a ranch to run, a school to build, a baby to prepare for. But tonight was for this, shared dreams, gentle touches, and the deep certainty that they had found something rare and precious in each other. In the gathering darkness, Sarah could just make out the stakes marking their future garden. Like their love, it would take work and patience to bring to full bloom, but the foundations were solid, the ground was fertile, and their hearts were ready to nurture whatever grew. The family portrait sat in pride of place on Sarah and Jackson's shared desk, taken on the day of the new schoolhouse dedication. Sarah stood beside Jackson, one hand resting on her now visible pregnancy, while behind them rose the gleaming windows and fresh-painted walls of Promise Creek's future. Quite a difference from that first train station photograph, Mrs. Henderson remarked, stopping by the ranch office to deliver some papers for the Women's Business Association. Sarah smiled, remembering that desperate girl with her single carpet bag. Sometimes I hardly recognize myself from then. Oh, I do, Mrs. Henderson said with a knowing look. That strength was always there, dear. It just needed the right soil to bloom, like the garden, which had flourished beyond their expectations. Yellow roses now climbed the porch posts, just as they had at Jackson's childhood home. Purple irises lined the paths, a tribute to Sarah's mother. And between them grew new flowers, their own choices, their own legacy taking root. The ranch had prospered too. Sarah's innovative accounting methods had drawn attention from other ranches in the territory. She and Jackson had started offering consulting services, helping other operations modernize their practices. The extra income would ensure their child would have every educational opportunity, though Sarah suspected any child of theirs would learn as much from the land and its lessons as from any book. The architect's final payment cleared, Sarah reported, as Jackson came in from his morning ride. The schoolhouse is officially, completely ours. Ours? He raised an eyebrow, hanging up his hat. I thought it belonged to the town. It belongs to the future, Sarah corrected, rising to meet him. "Like everything we've built here." Jackson drew her close, his hand gentle over their growing child. "Speaking of building, Rogers says the nursery addition will be ready next month. Though I still think we should wait to paint until we know if we're welcoming a Rose or a William." "Either way," Sarah said softly, "they'll know the stories. About your parents' dream of this ranch. About my parents' belief in education. About that day at the train station that seemed like an ending, but was really a beginning. And about their remarkable mother," Jackson added, "who turned rejection into triumph and taught an entire town to see beyond circumstances to possibility." Sarah touched the family portrait, then let her fingers drift to her mother's silver. And thimble, returned to her by Jackson, who'd secretly bought it back from the jeweler during the drought crisis. It served now as a reminder that sometimes what seems lost is merely waiting to return in a different form. "I got another letter from Thomas yesterday," she said. "He's engaged to a schoolteacher from Carson City. Asked if she could visit, learn about our Women's Business Association." Jackson smiled. "Life has a way of coming full circle, doesn't it?" Through the window, they could see Promise Creek spreading below them, no longer the harsh town that had rejected a poor mail-order bride, but a thriving community that had learned to value substance over appearance, possibility over prejudice. "Do you ever wonder," Sarah asked, "what would have happened if you hadn't been at that train station that day?" "No," Jackson said simply, "because I believe some things are meant to be. Not in an easy way, but in the way that the right people find each other at the right time, ready to build something greater than themselves." Sarah thought of all the twists and turns that had led them here, to this ranch, this love, this future, growing beneath her heart. "Together," she said softly. "Together," Jackson agreed, kissing her gently, "the way all the best stories end." But they both knew it wasn't really an ending. In the garden, new flowers were always blooming. In the schoolhouse, new minds were opening to possibility. And here at Willow Creek Ranch, their love story would live on, in their child, in the land, and in the legacy of two people who had learned that true partnership could transform not just two lives, but an entire community. Some said it was just luck, a desperate girl and a wealthy rancher finding each other at the right moment. But Sarah and Jackson knew better. It was about seeing beyond circumstances to the heart of things, about believing in possibility, and about the kind of love that builds something lasting. It was, in the end, about coming home, to the place, the person, and the life they were always meant to find.